Good morning. I am grateful for this opportunity to come into your homes via the live stream. Some years ago, before I met my wife, I dated a young woman who was a student at Agnes Scott College, a college located walking distance from the campus where I was preparing for the ministry. She was an art major, and she shared with me her first time working at the potter's wheel and working with clay. She stepped up to the potter's wheel with clay, and an instructor from Agnes Scott faculty walked up, began to help her. She was arrogant, and she was rude to the instructor. This woman said to the instructor, "It's clay. I think I can handle it myself." And the instructor quietly walked away. This woman that I was dating placed the clay on the potter's wheel and began to shape it and to mold it, and what she created was a disaster. She was frustrated with herself. She turned off the potter's wheel, took the clay that she had placed on the wheel, and put it on a shelf and left. Several days later, after she had regained her wits and her patience, she came back into the laboratory or the studio and took the clay off the shelf, placed it again on the potter's wheel, and discovered that in those few days, the clay had dried out. It was like a brick. She could not mold it or shape it whatsoever. So she did what she thought was reasonable. She took this hard lump of clay and she placed it into a bucket of water, resolving that she would return a few days later. And she did. She reached into the bucket, she took the clay out, and she placed it onto the potter's wheel and discovered now that it had become like mud. There was no way she could mold it or shape it. It ran all over the wheel and dripped to the floor. She said, "Doug, I learned two things that day. The first thing is that you cannot shape hard clay. The second thing is that you cannot shape mud. If you are going to be a potter, you have to have soft, pliable clay that can be molded and shaped into the vessel that you want." In the 18th chapter of Jeremiah, God tells Jeremiah, "Tell my people this, they are living clay in my hands, and I am the master potter, and life is the potter's wheel. And I am asking people to submit themselves to my hands as the master potter, so that I may mold them and shape them, be vessels suitable for my continuing work in the world." We must understand that if we come to God and we say, "God, this is what you need to do, this is what you should do, this is how you should respond during this virus that is affecting our nation and the world," we are like the hard clay. We're being stubborn, we're being obstinate, we are playing God. We are telling God how to be God. And God cannot shape us or mold us or use us if we are hard clay. On the other hand, if we decide to binge watch all of our favorite TV shows and let God take care of the world without participating in any way in what God is doing, then we're like mud that runs all over the wheel and onto the floor. We are not useful to God. God has granted every one of us certain abilities, certain gifts, certain talents. And God expects us to bring those gifts and abilities and talents and to place them onto the wheel of life and allow the Master's hands to mold us and to shape us and to direct us to be useful to God. God is at work in the world today. Even when God seems absent, God is at work. And God is accomplishing God's work through you and through me as we are allowing God to shape us and mold us according to our gifts and our abilities to be useful to God, to complete God's redemptive activity in the world. I will encourage you again, as I've encouraged you before. The way that you make yourself available to God and useful to God is to place yourself before God in the reading of the Scriptures and a helpful devotional. And as you spend time with God on a regular basis, always ask two questions. First, God, what would you have me hear as I read this passage of Scripture, as I read this devotional? And then secondly, God, what would you have me do? How would you use me as I read the Scripture and this devotional? It is then that we become living clay, and God can mold us and shape us and make us useful for God's continuing work in the world. Again, thank you for inviting me into your homes, and I look forward to being with you again on Sunday morning.